Hello, Touch Designer community. This is Robert, and this is another episode of Top Players Quarantined. Today, it's really a special episode because I have a unique guest. His name is Matthew Ragan. So when I talk about gods, I try to describe the change they made in myself. Everything I've built so far in Touch Designer, I've built relying on Matthew's guidance, on his workflow methodology, skillful organization, and mindful decision making. So I have a TD rule, which I wrote out so I can read it to you. It's called the who, when, why, what, how rule. If you, that's the who, should find yourself in difficulty, Matthew's tutorials will not only teach you how to solve problems, but also they will point out why you should think about them and when should you make decisions based on what. With that said, welcome Matthew Ragan.
Oh my goodness, that's such a lovely introduction. Hello.
Thank you. I've been thinking about ways, countless ways to introduce you, but I think everybody loves you already, so I've just called out your name and that's it.
Well, it's great to be here. It's I'm excited to have this conversation and talk about all things touch designer and what a strange world we suddenly are finding ourselves in.
And how are you managing in this period?
Oh, it's, like all things in life, it is an ebb and flow. It's a strange world to navigate. And I think, like, many people, there are days when it's easy and, you're hanging out and you're making cool things and it's quarantine ain't so bad. And there are some days where it feels really sad and hard and challenging. And I think I've read a bunch of different things on the web, and one of the most compelling things that I've read is that this feeling that we're kind of namelessly experiencing is a kind of grief that we can't quite point to. Our world has changed in ways that we don't fully understand yet. And I think all of us are trying to find out or find a way to navigate through what this experience is and what it's going to be like in the coming months and years.
Yeah. For me personally, I find it not so hard to let go. If you say it's a grief, I'm really looking forward to a better change than going back to the same old normal which led us here.
Absolutely. I think I'm excited to see what things that we can let go of that we don't necessarily need to hold on to anymore, and how we can reinvent parts of the world in ways that are better for communities, a little more distributed. I think that our kind of notions of closeness are things that are ready to change. So I think it's going to be good. I think it's just a strange time to be living through.
Are you working remotely? Or
we are. So, I was working for Obscura Digital, and then Obscura was acquired by the Madison Square Garden Company. And then I stayed with the Madison Square Garden Company for about 2 years. And back in December, I decided to leave that organization and kind of imagined that things would be really quiet and I'd have some like slow contemplative time. And then I kind of suddenly found myself with a couple of inquiries, and so ended up starting a small company with some other collaborators. And so we've had some work that's been keeping us busy and moving and shaking and making all sorts of interesting different experiments and pieces. So that's been really exciting. We kind of imagined that with the quarantine, everything was going to kind of stop a little bit, but most of the clients that we're working with have found ways to keep the work moving and to kind of stay on schedule and on target in a kind of strange way. So we're still staying busy despite the fact that so many things have slowed down.
That is awesome, and you've pointed out some subjects I've noted here. I did some research and I wanted to ask you about stuff, but you browsed right through them. It's okay. It's no problem. There's no problem. I've noted this because it really had an impact. I saw you talking to Elbers and Zoe in your last interview, and look, so everything we have big dreams. Sometimes we have goals to reach something, and my dreams are shaped mostly by the things I wish to change in the world, and by the people I admire doing so before me. Okay, so when I see and hear about them suddenly choosing a different path, I stop and almost naturally question my dream as well. And this happens when I saw, everybody knows that you worked as an interactive system designer at Obscura, and also about the giant steps that that company had made so far in becoming Madison Square Garden's own production company, right? Which led you to achieve the title of director of software. This was great. I've looked, this could have been a dream. One day I will get to work with Obscura, right? For me here. And suddenly you gave up on all of that and went toward teaching, right? Because I saw your pseudo magic, right, page, your new created pseudo magic page on Facebook, and I don't even know what it is. I hit like. It's not even online, right? It's not even.
I know there's hardly anything there yet.
Yeah. So what made you give up or make that transition from that wonderful position at Madison Square Garden to your newer projects?
Oh boy, isn't that a good question? Well, you know, it's interesting. Large organizations are strange animals, and I think one of the pieces that was the most exciting about Obscura is that it was this kind of crazy pirate ship of a organization, and we were always in uncharted waters doing wild, crazy, sometimes foolish things. More often than not, we were doing something crazy and silly. And through our acquisition and through our transition, those things changed in some really good ways. I think Obscura stabilized a fair bit in that process, which is really great. We kind of set out a bunch of new norms. We, changed our coding practices. A bunch of pieces got kind of leveled out. But what was fascinating to me about the corporate world was that the kind of separation of creating, making, and authoring became really apparent to me as I started to move into that role of director. I took on the responsibilities of associate director first, and did that for about a year before moving into the position of director. And the more I did that, the further away I got from the actual pieces that were exciting and compelling. I wasn't spending my days writing code anymore or understanding the complexities of why this problem was working or not working. And I found myself spending less and less time doing the things that I really loved, and more time kind of thinking from a kind of high-level picture about organization, structure, and how to kind of grease the wheels of a big machine.
Yes, I can understand what you're saying.
And I think, the more I've reflected on it, I think that it just came at the wrong time in my life. If that had happened 10 years from now, if I was, staring down the barrel of 50 or looking at my 60s, I might feel like this is the right place for me to be and kind of settle into this position where I'm thinking about structures and management and how to kind of organize a bigger piece of machinery. But I'm still hungry to be close to the machine. There's something energizing and exciting and compelling about being deep in a project and trying to understand why your code is working or isn't working. That part of the magic making, I think, is what always made me excited about going back to the office every day, or not sleeping at night, or going back to an installation to try and figure out why it wasn't working, or to watch people using it, right? I think we've all had that experience at an event or at an installation. Then you see people's faces light up when they understand how it's working, or they see the magic trick, or they're just caught in awe.
Yeah, you want to be everywhere, and your face lights up as well when you see the reaction and the behavior of your installation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I was really hungry to be closer to that part of the work again.
So maybe later, when that hunger is settled, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, all of us get to a point where we're like, oh, geez, well, I don't know if I want to write another one of these shaders or do another part of this thing. I think that time will come in life probably, but but now I still have that itch. I'm still hungry to make, crazy little networks and work on installations and experiences.
Yeah, but 80% of that time, it's not really magical when you sit and think in front of your computer, you know?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of not magic time, that's for sure.
How do you keep that hunger? Because I've learned so many things from programming to structural thinking and things that before in my VFX training, I didn't quite had to spend so many times learning it, you know?
Oh, that's hard. That's so hard. I learned a really interesting turn of phrase from a friend, which is that you can't always be passionate and excited about something. Sometimes you have to borrow someone else's enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that it's been so great to work with Elbers in the HQ. It's one of the reasons I keep going back to the forum and going back to the help group on Facebook, is that enthusiasm and excitement that you see in new users is contagious. And sometimes it's, going in and making a little example or helping give someone a nudge or a push in the right direction reminds you about why it was so compelling and interesting and exciting. And then you can go back to try and figure out why your extension isn't compiling, and why your physics simulation doesn't work the way that you want it to, and why this shader isn't behaving.
But that is really your style. I mean, I got excited every time I watched your tutorials, because you make little things feel very exciting, very rewarding. So you put a note here, and that's great. That's amazing. That's your style, and I think that's a really good description of what you told me earlier.
It's hard. It's I wish that the concepts of mathematics and computer science came naturally to me. I don't think that I'm a particularly gifted programmer. I think I'm a really stubborn programmer. I think I'm really determined to understand why something works and to reduce it down to its simplest idea, so that I can understand it from the very smallest kind of contraption all the way up.
Yeah.
And so that's how I try to remember any problem that I'm tackling, is that it might look like a mountain, but it's really just made out of a bunch of little rocks.
I've recently watched a video about this, and a guy was describing programming like you write lines of comments for yourself, and then you just translate your lines of comments to the computer, not the way around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. You're giving someone very simple instructions, a little bit at a time.
Very stupid instruction. He said very stupid, yeah, but very simple instructions, right? Okay, Matthew. So before we get to the tutorials part and all that contribution of yours, I am going to tell you about my first important contact with the video performance stage. That happened when a wonderful choreographer asked me to help her to do a performance in my hometown. After finishing film university and writing a thesis about multimedia platforms and the new language of live cinema, I wanted to do my bachelor degree live and press the buttons, edit it in real time, but they wouldn't let me. They said, you just have to make a documentary. Okay, I did so. But I did a documentary about VJing, and I edited like so. It was a mess. And yeah, in this performance, I've used Isadora, which I know you know and have used. And with the help of wonderful Mark Cognilio, who is also a dancer himself, I believe, I've managed to get that performance through with a whole interface on one screen and pushing buttons for every stage. It was a mess, but it worked. We left our public amazed. We also were amazed that it worked. And I discovered that you had a similar path in some regards with dancing, with the circus. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a big part of yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I came to this work, it feels like another lifetime ago now in some ways, but I started as a performer. I was an actor, dancer, circus performer.
Wow.
And I was I spent much more time being on stage than being backstage, which was exciting. It was compelling. It was interesting. And I kind of went through a bunch of different phases in that process. I think early on, when I was in my, oh my gosh, it's so strange to say this, right? Like when I was in my teens, right? Like when I was thinking about what college was going to be and what I wanted to study and what I wanted to do, I thought, oh, I couldn't possibly be a performer. I performed in high school a lot, and thought, well, there's, I couldn't make a living doing that. And then I had like a crisis and, facing my 20s, and instead I was going to be a graphic designer, and then I was going to be an English professor, and then I was going to be a chef. And I kept doing all these things that were never quite the thing that was exciting to me. And so finally I decided, the hell with it. I'm going to go and I'll study theater. So I did an undergraduate program at Cal State Fresno that was all focused on theater primarily, but then I did a kind of split major between theater and dance, and I performed during a summer internship with a company called Diavolo Dance Theater that's based out of Los Angeles, and was utterly in love with the highly physical and embodied experiences that I had there. It felt like the most impossible and unbelievable kind of artistry that one could be a part of. And so I decided, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to look for circus companies and dance theater companies, and this is the trajectory of my life. And right about the time I had settled on that was going to be my future, I was in a car accident. I was stopped at a light, and a car ran into me and knocked my car into another car, and that car into another car.
Oh my God.
And like, luckily I was fine. I, came out of that experience unscathed, no broken bones. Everything was all right. I drove this little Honda Civic, and it was kind of exploded all over the road. And unfortunately, like, the crazy thing that happened is that it shifted all of the audition schedules that I had mapped out for graduate school. And then so suddenly my future was not the future that I planned. And so I kind of was trying to figure out, what am I going to do? And in that process, I found a circus school that was based out of Vermont, that at the time was called Nimble Arts, and later became the New England Center for Circus Arts. And I said, okay, well, there's a crazy place where I could go to study circus. And I had an opportunity to continue some educational outreach work that I'd been doing in the summer. So I decided, all right, fine, I'm going to pack up my life in California. I'm going to move to New Hampshire and live in the woods. And I did that for about 7 years and studied circus and performed and did a bunch of different things, all the while trying to figure out what I was going to do next.
So that accident didn't change.
So it was
perspective. Yeah.
It did and didn't, I guess, right? Like it certainly, it didn't stop me from being hungry for physical embodiment and performance. But it did shift all of the plans that I had. So wow. I'd been in, I'd been in New Hampshire for about 6 years, 5 years, I guess. And I took a fall, I took a spill off a trapeze, and was okay. Again, like, very fortunate. I, had another crazy accident, but was okay at the end of it. And it was really that moment that was a kind of tipping point for me to start to think about and realize that, this body that I live inside of is a much more fragile thing than I wanted to think that it was. And so I started to think about, okay, well, what is it that I want to do that means that someday I might be able to own a home, or I could retire, or I'll have health insurance, right? Like, yeah, the kinds of things I think we all start to think about in our, mid-late 20s.
How does it feel? I mean, I don't know how high the top of the mountain feels to you, having achieved that experience, but I do believe that you have a natural inner guidance that leads you toward a teaching career more than anything. Is that true?
I think so. I was really fortunate. My grandfather was a teacher. My mother was a teacher.
All
Um,
right.
and so education has always been a really impactful and powerful tradition, I think, in my family. So I think that's one kind of resonant piece there. I also, when I was living in the Northeast, I worked for an educational outreach program. So while I was doing circus school in the evenings, I was working for an educational program during my kind of 9 to 5 job. And there I worked with at-risk youth that were 13 to 19, that were largely the first in their families to go to college. Um, our program served individuals that were mostly at about like 150% of the poverty level in the United States. So that experience was tremendously impactful for me. I think it's one of the reasons I've continued to try and be so committed to making materials and sharing the things that I've learned, was that I really watched education transform people's lives. And it's something that I think we take for granted sometimes, that the opportunity to learn a new idea, to explore that idea, to have other people to talk to about it, it really empowers you to change yourself and to change the world. And I think that as much as I can be generous and give back to the world to help other people do those same things, that it will make the world a better place for it. I might not see it, right? But hopefully.
I think you see it. I think you influenced this whole touch designer community, and it's one of the most generous and responding and lively community I have ever met in all my software journeys. Yeah.
Same. I think it's one of the things that keeps so many of us around, is that it's incredibly generous and impassioned group of people who are, tinkering and making and exploring and trying to understand complex ideas, or have big dreams and sometimes small budgets, and are trying to figure out how to make those things come to life.
And the fact that you can, there's so many ways you can skin a cat, because that's your saying. That makes everyone non-competitive as well, and they try to do in their own way. Everyone comes with their own result, and that is wonderful. But that is also a hard thing for us to learn, to figure out what is the best method. And you said something about document everything that you do. Do you remember this? I don't know if it was in a tutorial or something, but you did, and your website is surely an example of this. But what are the benefits of doing so?
Oh, so that actually came from a really remarkable mentor that I had when I was living in the Northeast, Dr. Daryl Hux, who is one of the most incredible human beings I've had the good fortune to collaborate with. He was a faculty member at Keene State College, which was the place where I was working. And we worked together on a couple projects. And when I was going to grad school, he made me swear to him that I would write about what I was doing. He said, I don't care what it is that you're doing, but you have to write about what you're doing. Because it's not only the way that you'll be able to reflect on what it is, but it's how you share your progress with other people. And so I struggled with understanding what that was going to look like. I wrote about Isadora. I wrote about kind of media theory and performance theory. And the piece I think that was really captivating, that I found the most kind of gap in, was in the touch designer kind of tutorial space at the time and documentation. I think back now, and that was, oh my God, I want to say that was almost 10 years ago, which is bananas to think about.
Exactly.
But at the time, there was no Envoyed book. What do you call it? The forum was still in the older version. There were not really any printed materials. There were no tutorials. Grady Sane hadn't written his tutorials yet. Richard had recorded a handful. The Touch Designer help group didn't exist yet. And so I remember it was like a Friday night, and I was working on this project and trying to understand I just wanted to connect a chop, a little LFO, to a level top to change the opacity. And I must have watched the Mutek videos like 3 times in a row, over and over and over again, trying to figure out what they were doing to make those connections. And I felt like, okay, well, here's a gap in the internet that I can contribute to. And so I really started because I wanted to make sure that I had breadcrumbs to find my way back to what I was doing. What I didn't quite expect was that there would be so many other people that would benefit from the same information. And I think, to your question, like, why document what you're doing? I think part of it is for yourself. Part of it is so that you can remember and reflect on the work that you've done. I used to do these photo a day challenges. And one of the kind of motivations around those is that that act of taking a photograph every day helps create a little anchor for what that day was for you. So you look back and suddenly you have this whole catalog of your days where you captured single moments. And I think the same thing happens when you start to document your work, is that all of a sudden you can look back and say, oh, I did work on that really big project, or I did solve that hard problem, or we experimented with this little R&D project. It didn't go anywhere, but I learned a couple of things there. And it's easy in the kind of crush and rush of Instagram and Facebook, and everyone's posting new exciting things all the time. It's easy to take for granted the work that you're doing and the progress that you're making in yourself as an artist, and in understanding complex ideas. So that active documenting really, I think, helps to also reinforce, like, oh, I am changing and moving and learning.
Yes, because that is quite a good point, because you felt so confident explaining those techniques that you maybe found out the day before or something like that. And it's hard to be confident in touch designer, even at pro levels. I mean, Elburz tell me that he also feels like a beginner almost every time he tries something new.
Oh,
this program does this to you.
It's interesting. It reminds me a lot of dance, actually. There's strange parallels between ballet bar and working in a touch designer network, because one of my dance teachers would challenge us as we kind of moved through more advanced courses. He'd like pull you aside and he'd say, why don't you come back to the beginner's class once or twice this week? And you feel like, oh, okay, sure. And sure enough, you'd go back to the beginner's class, and all of a sudden, a deep attention to the simplest movement reminds you that there are so many things that you're taking for granted. You don't take the time to really think about, why your body moves in a particular way until you have to think about, why is my body moving this particular way? I think the same thing happens when you sit down in front of, the blank canvas that is touch, and you're like, okay, I just want to make this little particle system bloom in this particular way. And for the life of me, I cannot understand the mathematics for how to make that work. I'll try it in tops. I'll try it in chops. I'll try it in sops. I'll try it here. Right? Like, we're always trying to understand and reinvent ourselves. I'm curious, the longer this quarantine goes on, the more I wonder about, what do the traffic patterns of the internet look like these days, right? Like, have people's schedules shifted? How is that getting distributed and moved around? Because it used to be that you'd stream things late at night and nobody would be online. And now I wonder if that's inverting, right?
You were actually saying in a nice interview that you are passionate about the trail that we leave, our digital ghost, our digital trail. Is that it?
That's exactly. Where our lives now are these collections of datagrams that we leave behind ourselves, right? It's the signature of where we've been and what we've purchased and what we've liked, and all of those pieces contribute to this kind of shadow self that that trails behind us in the world. It's a strange piece of life.
It would be interesting to see this done in some form of installation or interactive thingy.
Oh, yeah.
I think for everybody. So let's move on a little bit to your website. the Bible next to Elbur's book. Yeah. Because without your website and without Elbur's book, I would have dropped Stars Designer a long time ago, I think. Maybe, I don't know. But it sure made things easier, especially for a stupid guy that didn't notice the snippets in the program at all.
I didn't. I remember I went to visit Derivative in 2016. No, must have been 2014 or 15. And they showed me snippets and they showed me instancing. I was like, what? What are these things?
Yeah.
Why did no one tell me about these?
Yeah, same experience here. Oh my God. And I'm going to share the screen, maybe, if I manage
Great.
to. Okay, do you see it?
It is, yes, I do.
All right. And so this is Matthew Ragan's site. I'm sure everybody knows it, but what the heck. This is the latest blog. Here we find your latest bloggings, right? Your latest discoveries and everything appears here. This is my favorite part, and I'm sure you know the courses. I'm addressing myself now to everybody who's going to watch this. I'm sure you know the courses. Yeah, sorry. And the huge resource that this website is, and all the carefully categorized materials. So if you're a beginner, this is the best place to start. I think with the wiki help as well. But you can go through various concepts, and especially this one, the Python in Touch Designer, where you can really learn a little bit of Python. But aside from this, which I can stress enough, everyone should check it out. I noticed this this taxonomy of media installations. So are these your inspirations, or things you have met in your way, or they influenced you in some ways?
So what's interesting about this whole list is that it came out of in my graduate program, my work was split between traditional kind of theatrical courses and a whole curriculum that was all focused on kind of new media systems and experimental explorations of art, media, and engineering. And so one of the challenges we had in one of those survey courses was to look at a kind of collection and classification of the kinds of media that people make and consume, everything from more commercially kind of engaged work through the crafted artistic experience of the media artist that works in a kind of gallery setting. And so we started to collect a kind of spreadsheet of these different pieces in the class. And what I did is I kind of scraped together all of those things that people had collected. And I started to think about how would I categorize them and how would I put them together in some order. And so that's where this whole thing came from, actually, was just that collection of different types of experiences and installations, and how to understand what is this kind of work, right? Like, do we think of projection in one way? Do we think of lasers? How do we think of audio? What's the intersection of kinetic sculpture and media system? And how do we make sense of it? So that's really where this kind of laundry list of different things assembled from, was this kind of group effort to assemble different artist examples, and then to think about how would we organize that into a taxonomy? How would we, how do we categorize what this work is, or how to even talk about it?
Yeah, those are some great research links, and I've really enjoyed going through them lately in this period, and I think it's a good period to check out some great stuff. And also the tutorials. How do you feel about the tutorials? Because Touch Designer has been updating since then, but you have some strong principles there. So naming the operators, or leaving the name and actually completing the name with their actions was a great idea, and stuff like that. So that goes to last through time, right? But how do you feel now about the relevance of your tutorials? I think they're great, but how do you feel about them?
Oh, every day it feels like a struggle. There are times where I'm like, I look back at old tutorials and I think, oh my God, why have I said that? I should really delete that tutorial. And then I stop myself because I think, oh my God, as soon as I delete this thing, someone has relied on this anchor to help them understand some idea. So I can't delete it. And I remind myself that one of the things I committed to early on was that I was just going to learn in front of people. And so, I think, harkening back to that conversation we were having earlier, is that part of this is a kind of record of how I found my way to where I am now. So as much as I sometimes feel like, oh, I should clean up and tidy up some of these ideas, I also feel like, oh, well, it's not so bad to have a chronology of how you've learned different ideas and concepts. I think one of the pieces that I wish there was more time in the day for is I would love to go back and have a more comprehensive set to kind of reimagine what's a better kind of foundations through higher concepts kind of approach.
But I think I've resisted that. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. No, that's great to hear.
Yeah, I think the foundations are great, and you can do things in different ways, or better ways, on updated ways. Every time, every day, you can do something better, but it becomes part of you, part of your way, your persona, your ways of work, right? It's your walk.
Absolutely.
So that gives you style, right? You shouldn't change it just because there are 10 more new ways of doing. If it works, I mean,
it works.
Yeah,
exactly.
It works, and those are the magical words, right? It works. It's stable. Yeah, I think those are great tutorials and great methods to learn, and the discipline behind them is what you can get mostly out of any technique.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful to hear.
Don't delete anything, because I often go back to some little part of a tiny expression or something you did. So if I can find it, I will have a ruined project. Yeah, I rely on those. I don't want to relearn everything every time. If it works, if it's optimized, then yeah, it does its job. Okay, because I've been on the path of learning for so long, and I'm really trying to break that thing and try to do more things for myself. But it's hard when you see a new tutorial, new technique. It's addictive.
It's a good question. It's an interesting challenge, right? Because we want to learn more, we want to make more, and sometimes I think that the balance there is sometimes to think about, instead of the concept, what's a kind of creative sketch or expressive idea to create some idea around. I think I'm especially inspired by the work that we see Paqueta 12 do there, because he makes all sorts of interesting kind of little explorations that are little kind of little flowers of touch designer weirdness, beauty, that are really exciting to see.
Yeah. How do you feel about talking to us about your latest project with Zoe?
Oh yeah, so Mir is a fascinating and exciting project that we started almost 2 years ago now. So materializing interactive research was a kind of effort to think about what's beyond just me sitting down and writing tutorials for myself, but what's a more collaborative approach, both working with another artist creator, and also thinking about these days I feel like I make tutorials and lessons that are highly technical, and sometimes really nitty-gritty Python-y kind of stuff. And sometimes it's worth kind of thinking about what's that beautiful thing that's really fun to make in some interesting way. And so Mir has been an avenue for both of us to collaborate and explore what some of those pieces look like, which has been both really rewarding and exciting, and a way to feel like we're working on something together. You know, it's so interesting that you're on this 2020 teaching tour. We had these grand plans for what it was going to be to do a big teaching tour this year. But the universe has had a different set of plans there, it seems like, for us, which is, you know, that's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
What it has kind of opened up room for us to think about, though, is how can we take some of the ideas that we had about a tour and going different places, and instead think about, well, if we were going to do a workshop set that was all remote, what might that structure look like? So that's something that we've started to really kind of, you know, put some more attention to, is what's a better kind of exploration of, you know, touch designer for artists, touch designer for graphic designers, touch designer for programmers. You know, how can we start to make kind of flavors of these experiments and tutorials that are for the, you know, the wide variety of audiences that find their way to this tool?
Yes, and that way you can shift a little bit of the interactive impossibility to the big shows, and yeah, it's a good advice. I will think about this, because we are trying as well to find new solutions and new orientations. All right, so this is a great site. Are you still updating the older one, the Matthew Ragan website as well?
I am. I'm like doing a lot of cross posting. So Zoe and I both produce our own content and materials, and Mir is a place that we tend to post. We both post our kind of discoveries, musings, and explorations there collaboratively. We're slowly reaching out to other folks to kind of add more materials in that place. And so I think that, you know, we both want to kind of maintain, it's a strange world we live in, right? But like, to maintain your own identity as a brand, I think is important for all of us as artists and creators.
Yes.
But we also want to be collaborating on something together. So it's kind of a win-win there to be able to have that material in multiple places.
And is this a closed collaboration medium or an open project with people that you would select to collaborate or something like that?
It's slowly opening up more and more. We're finding more and more people that we want to kind of pull in to collaborate and work on some pieces there. We've got some kind of interesting kind of pieces that are simmering away. The kind of preview there is that we have a collaborator that's really excited about this notion of touch designer bites. What are things that you can learn to do in 5 minutes with only ops? I mean, like maybe one Python expression to do that thing that you always have to do, right? I think it's easy for us to get lost in these like big tutorials, right? Like every time I sit down with one of Vincent's like hour-long tutorials, I'm like, okay, I need a cup of coffee. I might need a cocktail. I'm going to need a glass of water. I need a snack.
And a calculator.
But it's right.
Yeah, pixel calculator. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what we're experimenting with, putting some form around is like, what's that little bite, right? What's the equivalent of the touch designer snack? That's like, oh yeah, I do want to know how to do that thing. And I can learn how to do it in 5 minutes. Perfect.
You know what's a really nice thing to see? I mean, being in this community for a long while, when it's a Captain Planet moment where forces combined, you know? And I'm talking about you and Albers. How did you meet?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we met online before we ever met in person. And I think we met in person for the first time. He was out in San Francisco working on a job, and he came through Obscura. And we like went out for sushi and drinks. And Albers and we'd exchanged messages on the Facebook help group, on the forum, and had like kicked back a few emails and Skypes a couple times, but had never met in person. We'd collaborated only online for, oh gosh, I don't know, probably
Yeah,
like 3 or 4 years before we
goes
ever met
back.
in person. Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, he's an amazing guy. I mean, he helped me a lot. His book helped me a lot. I printed his book. We still have it at the studio, printed in color and black and white because I have to do more of them. I have to print more of them. Yeah, and now he has this wonderful HQ community which you are part of, and that was awesome because I think this is the place to be right now in touch design. There are, I'm not denying there are great resources on the internet. How do you feel about this community?
The HQ community has been it's so interesting to be a part of. It's been really exciting. I was really excited when Elbers invited me to join as a moderator and as an instructor. I've made a couple tutorials for the HQ. And it's such an enthusiastic group of people who are really focused on thinking deeply about how to understand these concepts and create some of this kind of work. And I think that's one of the pieces that's really hard, is that it's, there's, like you said, there's so many different places and tutorials to search through and comb through. So how do you know where to start and what's a good idea and what's gonna like break your installation when you add 3 of them? And how do I think about what the hardware for all of this is? And right, there's a mountain of different things to kind of comb through and think about. And I think the HQ is a really exciting place to have a set of not only focused participants, because the community itself is full of some incredibly talented people,
Yes.
but also to have a set of really thoughtful, curated materials that help people really know how to approach the work in a meaningful way, I think is really important. And I say that as a person who has done, right, like I've done so many different tutorials only to go back and think like, oh man, that seemed like such a clever idea until it bit me later on. And ooh, I really wish I hadn't watched that thing, or ooh, that started a bad habit when I started doing that thing. Ooh, gosh.
Yeah, but people filter all these things and adapt to changes, and I think this is a wonderful occasion for you as well to correct those perceived mistakes. And you told me in your email
well,
that,
and I think we.
Sorry, this lag is killing me.
Oh no. I know, it's so great. It's like being back in the internet 10 years, right?
Yeah,
it's
cool.
A strange thing. It's. I think that's part of the joy of learning something like programming, though, is that sometimes, and I think we're all guilty of this, and it's a fascinating thing that I learned, especially working with younger people, is that sometimes you have to do something the really inefficient, broken way before you really understand why someone had that crazy idea, right? To like do it this other way. You really learn the importance of measure twice, cut once, after you've cut things the first time and had to buy a whole new stack of materials.
Yes,
so
mistakes are important.
Sometimes it's worth exploring a concept. Exactly. You learn way more from doing something wrong than you do from doing something perfectly the first time.
Stop. So I'm going to share the screen. Yeah, with Elbur's community. So, or both of your community. Let me just log in. Great. So here is the magic, the wonderful gold mine, the resources. These are wonderful tutorials. You recently made this MIDI and this Python advanced, I think. Yeah. Advanced tutorial and the render.
Oh yeah, those are a lot of fun to make.
Yeah. Everybody, I didn't know the thing. How long did you know the shadow technique using the light to view it inside the viewer? Because I didn't know that, and my shadow was
jeez. I must have. I learned that. So this is another reason that I find myself always going back to the forum, especially, is that people share all sorts of interesting techniques there, and I think someone had that in a TOE file and hadn't even mentioned it, And I remember looking at it and feeling like, wait, you can do what? Like, I can actually understand what what my light is looking at and how to like position it correctly so that I can draw my shadow map. How? And so, I'm also, I think one of the things I did early on was I took apart everything in the palette. Every piece or every example that was in the palette, I pulled into the network editor and went inside it and looked through every layer of every project I could find. And I remember when I started, I just thought, oh my God, I'm never going to understand how Touch Designer works. But it was that kind of slowly pulling it apart and pulling it apart and pulling it apart that really gave me the confidence to realize that, any of these things are just built out of lots of little things.
Yeah. Yes, and it's great that you go back and revisit these techniques. That was awesome. I have been struggling with shadows for the past 5 years in Touch Designer. My things didn't have good shadows. And it was so obvious, and I was, oh my God, why didn't I read the wiki or something like that? But I don't know if you can find that in the wiki. Maybe you do. So
there's like a very strange article about it that if you do enough searching with the right terms, you can find it. And then there's an old TOE file that's probably from 77.
Yeah, you will have to share that if you want to on every group, because I think people will appreciate it during the resources part of this talk. So inspiration time. You told me in your email that you are deeply interested about noise and as a tool or a visualization medium.
Oh yeah, I feel like I can never get enough noise, and I think let's see what happens if I share my screen. Okay, so the book of shaders I think is a really interesting example, especially about noise. And if we look here, especially fractal Brownian motion is just like gorgeous all around. Always. And you find these kinds of patterns in all sorts of organic forms. So we see it in these kind of cloudy structures. It becomes mountain ranges and height maps. It becomes these strange electric lines and almost lightning-esque kind of pieces. IQ is like, his work is always deeply kind of compelling and interesting to me, and the way that he manipulates noise to create these beautiful abstract forms, I think is always something that I'm like, oh man, that's a little bit of math goes a long way when you start to look at some of these pieces. IQ's work has, I look at something like this and I'm like, wow, it's not quite cloudy and it's not quite a seascape. It's almost marble, but it's not quite. It's this kind of crazy mix of all of these pieces. And the more you look at different kind of noise forms, the more you start to find all sorts of interesting organic shapes and pieces that come out of it. Right? Cellular noise is a similar kind of presentation. And if we look here at some of the examples in cellular noise, you'll see that that's web patterns emerge from Voronoi algorithms, and you get all sorts of interesting formations that are not only exciting to see, but when you start to create them and begin to manipulate them, they become even more exciting and interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons that noise feels so compelling and interesting to me, is because it has this organic behavior to it, that we see it in all sorts of things. And the more you study it, the more you feel like it's in this stucco pattern, and it's in these tile roofs, and there's noise patterns in asphalt, and it's in wood grain, and it's in skin texture, and it's in, there's a
Yes.
little bit of noise in a lot of places.
And I've watched a FX PhD course on visual mathematics for visual effects, and that professor, I can't remember his name right now, but it's an awesome guy and an awesome course. He told he was saying that noise is not that random as we would draw it or we would imagine it. So it's clusters more than chaos, you know, and we can use it in a controllable, calculated matter, so that it's not really random. As you pointed out in your GLSL course, it repeats itself. So I think it's a nice quality to think about.
That's exactly it. And it has a, especially when we think about noise that is based on determinist algorithms, right? And like determinism is a really interesting concept, especially in rendering, is that, you know, as long as I know all of the pieces that go into rendering this little pixel over here, I can, you know, as long as I have all the same conditions, I can repeat exactly that value. And part of what that means, and part of why that's so interesting to me, is that means that if we have a determinist way of understanding how something's going to move or present, then we can also start to think about how do we decentralize that. Because now I don't have to run a calculation on one computer to know how this simulation works. As long as I'm feeding it the right seed value, I could predict that value even if I spread that same idea across a whole cluster of computers, right? Which means that when we start to think about how we create immersive installations that are beyond the scope of a single machine, we can start to imagine how we build experiences, landscapes, and pieces that are rendered at a scale that is not only massive, but also incredibly powerful and interesting and compelling. That to me is one of the places where it starts to get really, really exciting. It's like, oh, well, pushing away at this kind of like concept of noise unlocks our kind of notions of what distribution means, what predictability means, and how we can start to do, how we can take advantage of those mechanics to create installations and experiences that are beyond just the what we can get away with on a single computer.
And is there a difference now with the whole calculations moving on the GPU?
It's certainly yes, no. It's much harder. Well, I should back up. I think working at Obscura, one of the first challenges that I faced there, I'd worked on installations and experiences that had as many as 4 computers before going to Obscura. And then the first job I worked on at Obscura was spread across 32 servers.
That's a heart attack.
That was talk about feeling like you're in the deep end of the pool all of a sudden. And I was like, so wait, I'm gonna write one tow file that has to work on all 32 of these computers and be predictable, and I've got to know how all of them are running, even though I'm sending them all the same instructions. Like, how is that gonna work? And I think working with that kind of distribution really helped me understand what it is that's happening when we work with fragment shaders or vertex shaders. Is it's the same idea, is that everybody gets the same instructions, but they need to know the conditions in order to execute their part of the job the right way. So as long as you write the instructions in a really clever way, then you can start to expand to scales that are really enormous. So part of that is the mechanics of it, and then part of it's understanding how to write that algorithm or what computational principle to exploit to achieve that thing that you're trying to do.
I'm guessing this is the love-hate relationship with machines that you were telling me about.
Exactly. That is exactly it.
And you're still struggling with it.
After all that time, there is something. Yeah. there's something really uniquely exciting about finding out how to make that concept that you're fighting with work. And in some ways it's similar to gardening, right? It's like you pull all the weeds and you water things on a regular basis and you get the right fertilizer and you do all those steps for the moments where you get to sit back and enjoy the beauty of your like carefully manicured garden on sunset in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
And I think fighting with machines or collaborating with machines is the same kind of thing. It's like the moment when everything finally comes to life is the moment when you feel like, okay, that was worth it. It really was okay.
Yeah, I've had that experience, and it feels great. It's usually longer. It takes longer than your usual software, your usual suspects, but it's very rewarding. And I think you told me that you think a lot about writing on your relationship to media systems, and how do you found ways to think like computers and to help computers think like us? How this is a journey. Yeah, this is a programming journey, I think, or something like this.
Absolutely. I think, and this comes from the kind of theory-based work I was doing in grad school, where we spent a lot of time. We read Manovich, we read Auslander, and we read some of the other media theorists, McLuhan, and trying to understand how did we think about organizing systems and structures, and how did we make order in the world, and what does order mean in the world? And that's one of the interesting pieces I think that we're like still trying to confront and understand with our screen-based medium, is that it moves so quickly. And the tech industry especially doesn't have a particularly vested interest in being reflective. And so I wonder, how are we going to look back at these times, right?
Yeah.
We're all about moving fast, move fast, move fast, move fast. Oh, fast that's cool, but this is cooler. Look at that thing. Oh, whoa, whoa. Exactly. Yes. And so I find myself wanting to be more contemplative about what I make and why I make it, and what's the ideology of a particular thing. I think the kind of project that I've kicked around a lot, someday when I do a PhD, what I want to do is I want to look at architectures like Notch, Unity, Unreal, Touch Designer, and explore them from the notion of what's the ideology of those different platforms. What do they value? How do they think, and what's important to them? And what are their notions about how we should think about the world? And how do those structures push back on us and shape the way that we express our ideas, what we explore, what we don't explore?
All right. I've recently started following, in this period of time, your photo blog, because I really like those moments that you capture. No, so also cats as well. And I saw that you actually integrated a lot of AI stuff in there. Image processing, computer, machine dreaming, or stuff like that. Yeah. So I think this is a way of reflecting.
A lot of that exploration. Absolutely, absolutely. So much of that exploration came from Zoe's work and their their thesis project. Oh yeah. I should pull up this. So this piece here.
Yeah, that's a great blog, and it proves you are human.
Zoe worked on a I know, right? Her piece, Remnants of a Ritual, was this deeply intimate exploration of a number of different overlapping elements. So one of her primary ingredients for this particular exploration was a catalog of photographs from their grandfather. Zoe is a videographer, photographer themselves, and that interest and enthusiasm has its own family lineage, right? Their grandfather was a photojournalist in Venezuela, and has tens of thousands of negatives that had been collected over all of his years of doing photojournalism. And so one of the pieces, Zoe, oh my goodness, it was incredible. We spent part of one summer going through documenting, scanning, cataloging, and looking at, just roll after roll of negatives. And part of what Zoe wanted to do is they wanted to explore this archive of images and to bring to it a kind of digital alchemy, a kind of reimagining of mixing ingredients and this kind of alchemical fusing of notions and ideas. So a part of that exploration, a part of the way that that they expressed that was to look at how does machine learning and how does this kind of deep dreaming style transfer process work and play, especially as we start to remix old ideas and old photographs with new ones. So we went on this kind of crazy journey where we would take photographs of textures, of other photographs, of other paintings, train models, and then test different outputs. So I think at one point we had accumulated over 80 different models of different input styles that we could then apply to these photographs. So I did this, rather than doing the kind of runway ML approach for this, I kind of dug down and learned the machine learning. I mostly worked with PyTorch as a framework for this, but how to do the training and then how to build models, and then from the models, how to do a fast style transfer model. And the result there, Flickr, to your point, looks like this wild, crazy piece here. Hopefully this will remember who I am as I sign in. And so part of what we explored here, and this is a kind of good example, is that this is a photograph that I had in a catalog, and here are all the different styles, right, that we applied to it. And so part of this was a very alchemical and developing kind of development style look at what makes a good model. We spent a bunch of time kind of fighting with like photographs that we thought would make great models that made really bland outputs, and then other times we had a photograph where like, oh, this isn't going to do anything interesting, and then sure enough, every photograph that you style transferred with it was stunning and beautiful. So that's part of the inspiration here was really to kind of explore what are the boundaries and ideas about how we can collaborate with machines in ways that are really interesting and compelling.
Yes, and I think it lets you feel, maybe if you are working with Zoe, which feels like such an organic type worker, and you bring some methodology and your great structures to this, and also you can feel the computer being as the third person in the room working together with you. I feel like that's the case here.
Exactly, and I think that's part of the way that I like to approach this, is that I've spent so much time kind of building large systems and this kind of machinery, that's having someone who kind of sits on the other side of the room and goes, well, but why can't it do this? And I feel like I'm usually the one that's grumbling, like, well, I can do that. It's just hard, and it'll just take me some extra time to figure out. Okay, fine, you're right. We should explore how to do that. Okay, fine. Let's look at how to explore that idea.
I can relate to that mumble.
I think good collaborators do that to one another, though, right? You have one force that pushes you into chaos, and then there's another force that pulls you away from the edge of chaos. So there's a kind of ebb and flow there as you try to figure out the middle ground for how to explore some of these ideas. And it's, Zoe's work is, I always like talking about Zoe's work because the depth and exploration of their both kind of experiments and interest is always fascinating to me. Right? They'll do projection experiments that are these little micro installations of, pico projector on a crumpled piece of paper, and how do we understand that? And what if we shine light at a prism? And what if we push particles around and do this other kind of crazy thing?
That's a pretty hard surface to map, from my opinion. Yeah.
Well, and that was right. That is exactly what I said too. I was like, oh, well, you're never going to map that. Like, that's going to be so hard to map. And so it's like, sure. Like, I'm not interested in mapping it perfectly. I'm interested in what's the interplay of light on the surface, and how do I think about how my projector is a collaborator in this experience and is making something interesting. It doesn't have to be perfect, because I'm just exploring an idea. And I think that kind of perspective is one that I forget sometimes, because I kind of often fall into this, oh my goodness, we need to I should really get out the Connect so we've got a perfect point cloud of the surface of this crumpled piece of paper so we could reconstruct the topology so that it's correctly mapped.
And also deadlines.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he's like, no. Like, let's just play with the projection and see what happens, right? So one of my favorite pieces was this kind of crazy explosion of particles. Zoe was exploring this idea and then said, okay, well, what happens if we project that back onto some empty frames? So then we started to play with oh, well, here's this, the world projected back on itself in these kind of novel, interesting ways. This is actually just a vertex displacement kind of idea, right? Where the position of the pixel is a function of its luminance combined with another multiplier to kind of create this exploding, expanding and contracting feeling. And this is, rendered from a projector that's pointed right at it. All the particles fly towards you. They fly back, a little bit of feedback, and you get these beautiful trails. And then we took a set of picture frames that were on the wall, and we thought, okay, well, if we take those and we just put some plain cardboard in them, now all of a sudden we have these kind of empty frames. So next we had a set of empty frames that we just used Kantan Mapper to create little quads.
Yeah.
Or
they look nice even by themselves.
Right, just by themselves they look interesting, right? Just in this kind of brightly lit kind of way. And then they mapped content back on top of these. In this kind of exploration of exploded particle pieces and then solid forms. This is one of those early, right? This is an early exploration that never made it into their thesis project, but was an essential ingredient in trying to understand what's the aesthetic and idea and message that they were trying to convey with the piece.
And it gives you the impression of a bigger world hidden behind these windows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was a whole nother exploration that was all about projection on kind of non-traditional surfaces. These kind of crystallized artifacts were really, I'm going to turn down the volume here a little bit, was another space that was really kind of compelling and interesting. So again, I think about, oh my God, how are we going to map this perfectly? And so he was like, no. This is about what happens when this light creates refractions and reflections on this non-traditional surface. It doesn't have to be perfect.
I
The
think,
interesting part of this is that it's not perfect.
yeah, I think these are lines of codes meeting lines of poetry at the same time.
Exactly. And that's where I think having a collaborator that is, pushes on you and pulls you away from the kind of edge of perfection is really important.
Yeah, you feel
And
disarmed
compelling.
at times, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would, I'm biased, of course, but I think that everyone should check out Zoe's work because it's
they look amazing, and they seem beautiful and really personal and sincere,
absolutely.
and that's important. That's more important to have big installation.
Exactly.
You've mentioned some now we are at the inspiration part, so you've sent me some resources you liked. You already showed us the book of shaders, which I actually started about a year ago, and I'm still learning. And you also mentioned the Learn the Hard Way, which was my first Python resource. If you want to browse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Learn Python the hard way.
I would complete this with Corey Schaefer's tutorials. I would put a link in the underneath the video at the end. Corey Schaefer is a guy that explains fantastically every comments under his videos are, man, where were you when I paid $400 or $4,000 for a course? Yeah, that kind of guy. And there is also a funnier way to learn Python with Socratica, which is do you know it?
I've done little pieces of it.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. A nice way to browse through concepts. Yeah, and learn the hard way, which isn't that hard. It's just applied.
I mean, that's, I think, exactly it, right? Is that I did learn Python the hard way back before it was finally sorted into an actual kind of codified book. And I think if we get more info, I think here is a really interesting kind of breakdown of all of the different pieces, right? And then what's really, I think, great about this particular resource is that it's a reminder that learning how to program isn't about fast tracks or secret tricks or things that make it work right away. It's about diligent practice and consistently fighting to understand the smallest pieces of it, so then you can understand the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. And sometimes that means you go back and you start all over again and you repeat the process until it's embedded inside of you and you understand how it's working. I remember sitting with a laptop in bed late at night, going through these one at a time and copying line for line and not understanding what I was writing, but understanding that it was important to go through those motions in order to build the muscle memory to ask the next question.
Yes. With patience, rewards will come.
Exactly.
What is ClickUp, Len?
Oh my goodness. This is such a silly tool that is so great. And I think, everybody has their own toolkit that they want to work with and think about. But ClickUp is it's a good piece here. Writing is probably a stack in. Yeah. So it's a project management tool. It's an agile development framework. It's similar to your kind of like what's the ticketing tool? It's not quite Trello. It's not quite Asana. It's somewhere in between those things.
Yeah, we use Asana.
But it's what I use. Mm-hmm. It's what I use for keeping track of what are all the projects that I'm working on. What are the tools that I've built? What do I want to learn? What are all the pieces that I want to get back to? And you can kind of think of it as a kind of big board of all the pieces that you want to work on, or a to-do list that you're checking things off of. We use it these days, especially as we're collaborating, around making sure that we all know what we're working on at any given time. So it's a kind of project management and organizing tool that I find really useful.
Yeah, I've recently discovered Workflowy, which is fun to use.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a very simple, structured, but this looks nice and looks structured and ordered. I think it's nice that it has this hierarchy, yeah, menu. Everything with a hierarchy menu is great.
The piece, right? An interesting piece about other, I don't think I have one set up here, but one of the other features that exists here with this particular toolkit is that you can actually build little web forms as a way to fill in pieces of your to-do list. So rather than like going to your to-do list and making a task and I've got to do this thing, instead it can just be like a little web form, like a Google form that you fill out.
All right. Okay.
So I'm always looking for ways for how to automate some of my workflow and process. Because checklists, you know, if it's not on the checklist, I don't know that I'm going to get it done. And this is a nice way to keep track of my sticky notes and my to-do list pieces.
We never managed to be correct about the estimations of that those tasks. You know, you put an end, a start date, and an end. That's a useless tool for this industry.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what is rescue time?
A project will always grow.
Yeah.
Oh, rescue time. This is, we're going to learn so much about me. Right. So like, I'm similarly really interested and compelled by the metrics and things that we can learn about our lives. And so as a tool, this is one of those pieces that I sometimes go back to try and understand, like, where did all my time go? Right. So, okay. So you install a little application on your computer. It should be this little icon right here. And you kind of give it permission about when it's allowed to watch your activity and what things it can categorize for you. And then you set up some rules about, you know, what software falls into what category. And then it gives you a nice little dashboard of, okay, well, clearly last night I was very productive. I was very focused on writing some Python.
It says so here.
And right in the early hours of the morning. You know, it looks like around noon, that's when I do, that's probably when I do a lot of my work on the HQ. This, you know, I think especially our work, right, in this world, it can become really interesting to know where I lost my time to and what are the things that are breaking my flow and movement. I know that in the past, I've used this to kind of understand, you know, in a particular week, I might feel like, man, I don't feel like I got anything done this week. And then looking back, I might find that, well, you know, I didn't do very much programming, but I did do a lot of communication and scheduling. I spent a lot of time on Slack. I wrote a lot of emails. So I didn't lose my time. I just used it to do all the planning and prep and get everything out of the way so that I could be really focused this week.
Does this take a lot of time to organize? Because I remember that Mitch Hedberg quote in which he said, I saved a lot of money to buy a machine that tells me how much money I've saved or something like that.
You know, I think I spent a little bit of time early on categorizing, but I don't think I spend any time actually categorizing at all of these days. These days, all I do is I look at, you know, what's the breakout of the time that I've spent and used, and then how's that accumulated? It's also got a nice little interesting, well, we're going to see there's be something silly in my calendar, I'm sure. It dumps right here into your calendar as well, so you get a nice little breakout of what happened on a given day. So there's, you know, other like really silly integrations to kind of see where your time went, what you were working on, and the like. I'm not a premium user. I just use the free version. But there's also a whole set of features here as well. If you find that you're not meeting some of your expectations and you need a little bit of help.
Yeah, this is interesting. It might help me to go back a little bit on social media time.
Yeah, exactly.
Congrats for your 10%. I think that's a good percent.
And that's exactly what some of these other features do, is that if you've blocked some time during your day when you're not supposed to be distracted, it'll remind you, it'll give you a little nudge and say, hey, I know that you said that you weren't going to be here. Are you sure you want to be on this site?
And can you cheat? Can you use your mobile phone? Does it know?
There's a mobile app that you can use as well. So you can kind of collect your metrics across all of your devices.
All right.
So it's an interesting little tool to do some of that. I wonder,
and does it have an API? You can do something with it, with this data?
That is a great question. I want to say that it does have an API.
Or maybe you can download your data and use that as a file.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It has integrations with Gyroscope, which is Gyroscope, which is a beautiful little iOS and Android app that does a similar kind of collection. So if you're interested in that kind of like data visualization of your life, this is a really interesting little piece, a little way to kind of scrape some of that information.
Is it better than the iPhone's native app?
I think the iPhone's native app is better for just your iPhone. Mm-hmm. I find that Rescue Time is a better tool if you're working across operating systems.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. If you're in Mac, sometimes you're in Windows, sometimes you do something on a Linux server, a few hours a day. Like you can have a way to spread across all of your different platforms and devices.
Yeah. So that people aren't worrying so much right now on how much time they're spending on their computers, mostly on their phone, because the computer is only essential work.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a strange set of tools, that's for sure. This harkens back. I was really obsessed with tracking my sleep schedule. I did a kind of experiment once upon a time. I wonder we'll see if I sleep schedule, if I still have it. No, I don't know.
You're a very organized human being. Really?
Sleep tracker. Oh, I don't know if it exists anymore. Tracker. Nope. Oh man. Once upon a time, I had a spreadsheet that I meticulously tracked all of my sleeping patterns for about 2 years.
Let's live to mystery if you are snoring or not in your sleep.
Right, exactly. Oh.
Okay. So, and you shared another, the last resource, Feedly. What is Feedly?
Oh,
so man, you got so exciting about everything.
I really loved Google Reader when it existed. And Feedly is a kind of tool that's similar to that, where it allows you to find a curated collection of the blogs, websites, or other materials on the internet that you want to consume that you might not necessarily want to have 16 tabs open for.
Yeah, this is great. I like this a lot.
It's a nice little kind of collection and way to kind of see all of the different pieces that you might be interested in the world in a nice, clean format, right? It strips out all the ads. It's got this nice kind of pristine way of reading through the articles. And you can also, of course, bounce right to the website if you want to see the whole thing.
That's great. I saw WeTransfer do something like this with great articles. If you are waiting for your upload, you can check out the content. But this is a great tool, and I was trying to find a tool that would allow me to share or keep links. You have a link, you want to put it somewhere, and you send it through Messenger or something like that. And I found something like link.io. Keep. Right, this is it.
I
How great is
use
this?
Google Keep an awful lot because you can use tags, um,
Oh,
and
this is great.
I stick all sorts of things in here these days. So like, things like if I search for a touch designer, I bet.
I didn't know about this because I don't have a Gmail address. Oh my God. This is like operator snippets for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great.
So this is another little tool that I use, and you can kind of see it in two different ways. You can see this kind of big board, or you can see it just like kind of list view.
Yeah, very nice resource. Thank you for this. I'm going to post every link that we have talked about it underneath the video at the end. I don't want it to end. I would like to do a second part or something like that, but I have to make this video watchable. And let's touch the last point. And you've mentioned you have two hobbies: cooking and photography. Which one do you prefer talking about?
Oh boy. Well, these days it feels like cooking is the center part of the world that we all are doing more and more of. And I think there's probably like an intersection of photography and cooking.
Yeah, there are
right.
compositions, recipes, color management. Right. Yeah, I cook based on color, not on taste.
Oh, absolutely. It's been such an interesting journey, I think, for so many of us, right? Like before all of the lockdowns and restrictions and those pieces, it was not uncommon. We'd go out on a Friday night and we'd have dinner someplace, and that was great. Or you'd meet someone for lunch in the afternoon. And these days, it feels like so much of our time is revolves around the kitchen and what's happening in the kitchen. And we found ourselves doing all sorts of kind of cooking experiments and explorations that I never would have imagined that we might. One of the craziest ones was that the building that we live in, there's a catering business that operates out of the first floor. And when the lockdown happened, a bunch of their contracts got canceled. And so they helped orchestrate a big set of orders for everybody in the building who wanted wholesale produce, which is amazing. But we got ginger, and we thought like, it'll be like a little bit of ginger, but it was a bowl of ginger. It was I think there's a photo here that I can find. It was a unimaginable amount of ginger. It was like, I remember thinking like, oh no, what have we done? What could have happened? Right? It was a lot of ginger. And so then we suddenly found ourselves asking ourselves, what are we going to do with this? We're going to make candied ginger. We're going to make this. We're going to make that. And we ended up making a cold pressed ginger syrup.
That's the best idea.
Which is delicious. We put it in tequila. We put it in bourbon. We put it in our smoothies.
So much for healthy.
Right. Well, but it's interesting when you find those little pieces that are suddenly inspiring and exciting and compelling in ways that you never would have expected.
Yeah, you seem to to go through this with a really joyful attitude. And would you like to share that with everyone? I mean, yeah. What are your words for everyone who's going through this weird period?
I think back to the things I used to say in grad school, both to other graduate students, and that what I would say to myself is that you got to remember that you got to ride the ride. The more you resist the universe, the more the universe will remind you that you are not in control of it. And so sometimes it's about finding where to surrender and realize that sometimes the roller coaster goes up, sometimes the roller coaster goes down. And when you're at the bottom of that, right, when you're at the bottom of the roller coaster, the bottom of the sine wave, there's going to be a time when it starts to go back up again. When you're on the top of it, it's important to balance that joyful moment against the realization that there will be dark days too.
Yeah.
Everything is that ebb and flow. And I think the more that we can appreciate that cadence, that rhythm is a part of what life is, the more you can take a breath and realize that in your darkest moments, there's going to be a bright day that's going to come. And when things feel really bright, take a breath, plan for the future, because there'll be a dark day too. So maybe save some of that ginger syrup or tuck away a few extra dollars, because you'll want it when the roller coaster bottoms out.
Yes. Thank you, Matthew. That was extraordinary. That was beautiful. Thank you for this opportunity to share this time with you.
Thank you. It's been a real roller coaster tonight as well. There's been good internet connection. There's been bad internet connection.
Yeah.
There's been funny stories and weird moments. It's been great. It's really been a joy.
I hope we'll meet again. I hope we see each other in the community, on every project that we can collaborate on. Thank you.
I'm sure we will. And someday we'll start moving in the world again, and I'm sure our paths will cross.
Yeah. Great. Have a great night, and thank you. See you soon.
Yeah. See you soon. Be well.